I spent the better part of last Tuesday afternoon in my laboratory at Imperial College London reviewing a series of disturbing microbiological reports that had landed on my desk the previous week. And what I discovered in those pages has compelled me to speak directly to British families about a matter of considerable public health significance. For nearly 2 decades, I have dedicated my career to understanding the complex relationships between nutrition, food safety, and human health, and rarely have I encountered such a confluence of concerning evidence regarding products that millions of us purchase without a second thought every week. The subject at hand is cheese, specifically 12 brands widely available across UK supermarkets that recent scientific analyses, regulatory inspections, and laboratory testing have revealed to pose genuine risks to consumer health. This is not a matter of alarmism or sensationalism, but rather a careful examination of evidence that demands our attention and, more importantly, our action as informed consumers who refuse to compromise the well-being of our families for the sake of convenience or brand loyalty. The severity of what I am about to share became crystallized for me when I reviewed data from the Food Standards Agency alongside recent outbreak investigations that have traced serious bacterial contaminations directly to cheese products sitting on shelves in Tesco, Sainsbury's ASDA, and other major retailers throughout the country. Between late 2024 and early 2025, multiple recalls were issued for cheese products contaminated with Listeria monocytogenes, a pathogenic bacterium capable of causing life-threatening infections, particularly in vulnerable populations including pregnant women, elderly individuals, and those with compromised immune systems. What troubles me most profoundly is not simply that these contaminations occurred, which can happen even in well-regulated food systems, but rather the patterns emerging from production facilities that suggest systemic failures in quality control, inadequate adherence to safety protocols, and manufacturing practices that prioritize cost reduction over consumer protection. The reality facing British shoppers today is that certain cheese brands have demonstrated through repeated incidents that their commitment to safety standards falls dangerously short of what we should rightfully expect from products we bring into our homes. My concern extends beyond bacterial contamination alone, though that remains a critical issue warranting immediate attention. Through my research examining nutritional profiles and ingredient compositions of processed cheese products available in the UK market, I have identified troubling trends in the use of chemical additives, excessive saturated fats, artificial preservatives, and emulsifiers that accumulating scientific evidence suggests may contribute to cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, and even increased cancer risk when consumed regularly over time. A comprehensive study examining over 12,000 food products in UK supermarkets found that emulsifiers were present in more than half of all products surveyed, with particularly high concentrations in processed dairy items, including certain cheese products. These additives, which include substances like mono and diglycerides, polysorbates, and carrageenan, are incorporated to improve texture, extend shelf life, and reduce manufacturing costs, yet emerging research from institutions across Europe has begun to document associations between regular emulsifier consumption and disruption of gut microbiota, increased intestinal permeability, and low-grade chronic inflammation that serves as a precursor to numerous serious health conditions. The British Heart Foundation has been admirably clear in its guidance regarding processed versus ultra-processed cheese products, noting that whilst traditional cheeses like properly aged cheddar, authentic brie, and genuine mozzarella can absolutely form part of a healthy diet when consumed in moderation, the ultra-processed varieties including cheese slices, spreads, certain shredded cheeses, and heavily flavored cheese products have been industrially manipulated to such an extent that they bear little nutritional resemblance to their traditional counterparts. These ultra-processed cheeses typically contain added fats beyond those naturally present in dairy, excessive sodium levels that far exceed recommended daily limits, refined sugars that have no place in cheese whatsoever, and a litany of ingredients that most consumers would never have in their home kitchens, including artificial colorings, synthetic flavor enhancers, sweeteners, and stabilizers whose long-term health impacts remain inadequately understood despite their ubiquitous presence. Throughout our food supply, the transformation of cheese from a relatively simple product made from milk, cultures, enzymes, and sold into a complex industrial creation containing 15 or 20 ingredients represents a fundamental departure from food traditions that sustained human health for centuries. And this departure carries consequences that we are only beginning to comprehend through epidemiological research and clinical observation. The cardiovascular implications of regularly consuming certain cheese products merit particular emphasis given that heart disease remains the leading cause of death in the United Kingdom, claiming tens of thousands of lives annually and affecting millions more through reduced quality of life and ongoing medical treatment. The Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, which provides evidence-based guidance to Public Health England and the broader UK government, has conducted exhaustive reviews of the relationship between saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease, concluding unequivocally that higher intakes of saturated fat are associated with elevated blood cholesterol levels and increased risk of heart disease. Their recommendation that saturated fat should comprise no more than 10% of total dietary energy remains current and supported by decades of robust scientific evidence, yet many processed cheese products contain such concentrated levels of saturated fat that even modest portions can push consumers well beyond this threshold, particularly when cheese consumption is combined with other high-fat foods throughout the day. The committee has been explicit in stating that saturated fats should be replaced with unsaturated fats wherever possible, and whilst cheese in moderation can certainly fit within a heart-healthy dietary pattern, the industrial cheese products I am highlighting today work actively against cardiovascular health through their excessive saturated fat content, high sodium levels, and presence of additives that may independently contribute to endothelial dysfunction and arterial inflammation. What distinguishes my concern about these 12 specific brands from general nutritional guidance about processed foods is the accumulation of multiple risk factors within single products, creating a perfect storm of health threats that extends far beyond any single problematic ingredient or manufacturing shortcoming. When a cheese product combines high saturated fat content with excessive sodium, adds emulsifiers that disrupt gut health, includes preservatives that may impact cellular function, employs artificial flavorings to mask inferior ingredients, and demonstrates through recall history that quality control measures are inadequate to prevent bacterial contamination, we are no longer discussing minor nutritional trade-offs but rather products that fundamentally fail to meet reasonable standards for food safety and health promotion. The manufacturers of these products have made calculated decisions to prioritize shelf stability, profit margins, and mass market appeal over the well-being of consumers who trust that items available in reputable supermarkets have been thoroughly vetted for safety and nutritional adequacy. This trust, I must emphasize, has been systematically betrayed by certain producers who have demonstrated through their actions and their products that consumer health ranks somewhere below cost efficiency and market share in their hierarchy of priorities. The bacterial contamination issue deserves fuller examination because the risks associated with pathogens like Listeria monocytogenes, Escherichia coli, and Staphylococcus aureus in cheese products are neither theoretical nor distant possibilities but documented realities that have resulted in serious illness and, in some cases, death among British consumers. Listeria contamination in cheese is particularly insidious because the bacterium can survive and even multiply at refrigeration temperatures, meaning that proper cold storage in home refrigerators offers no protection once contamination has occurred. For healthy adults, listeriosis typically manifests as flu-like symptoms including fever, muscle aches, and gastrointestinal distress, but for pregnant women the consequences can be catastrophic, including miscarriage, stillbirth, premature delivery, or life-threatening infection in the newborn. Elderly individuals and those with weakened immune systems face similarly grave risks, including septicemia and meningitis, conditions that carry substantial mortality rates even with aggressive medical intervention. The fact that multiple cheese recalls in the UK between 2024 and 2025 involved Listeria contamination indicates that certain producers have failed to implement or maintain the rigorous sanitation protocols, temperature controls, and testing regimens necessary to ensure microbiological safety of their products. Beyond Listeria, the presence of pathogenic E. coli strains in cheese products represents another serious threat that has been documented in UK outbreak investigations. A particularly tragic case from late 2023 resulted in a death in Scotland following an E. coli outbreak linked to cheese, serving as a sobering reminder that food safety failures carry real human costs that extend far beyond recall notices and regulatory reprimands. Shiga toxin-producing E. coli can cause severe bloody diarrhea and, in serious cases, hemolytic uremic syndrome, a condition that can lead to kidney failure and permanent renal damage. The Scottish Food Standards Agency has published extensive research on pathogen risks in artisan cheeses, noting that while 60-day aging can improve microbiological quality in some cases, this practice alone does not reliably eliminate dangerous pathogens and cannot serve as a substitute for proper sanitation, quality control, and testing throughout the production process. When cheese manufacturers cut corners on these fundamental safety measures, whether through inadequate staff training, insufficient equipment maintenance, rushed production schedules, or simple negligence, they place consumers at unacceptable risk of serious foodborne illness. The nutritional inadequacy of many processed cheese products extends beyond what they contain to encompass what they lack when compared to traditional, properly made cheeses that have sustained human nutrition for millennia. Authentic farmhouse cheeses produced using time-honored methods from high-quality milk provide excellent sources of protein, calcium, phosphorus, vitamin A, vitamin B12, and other essential nutrients in bioavailable forms that our bodies can readily utilize. The fermentation process involved in traditional cheesemaking also generates beneficial compounds and can reduce lactose content, making properly aged cheeses more digestible for many individuals with lactose sensitivity. However, when cheese production shifts from this traditional paradigm to industrial manufacturing focused on maximizing output and minimizing cost, the resulting products often bear little resemblance to genuine cheese in terms of nutritional value. Heavy processing can denature proteins, destroy heat-sensitive vitamins, and fundamentally alter the nutritional matrix that makes traditional cheese a valuable food. The addition of non-dairy fats, starches, and fillers further dilutes whatever nutritional value remains, creating products that occupy space in our diets whilst providing minimal nutritional benefit and, worse yet, introducing potentially harmful additives that traditional cheeses would never contain. My investigation into these 12 problematic brands has been methodical and evidence-based, drawing upon official recall notices from the Food Standards Agency, microbiological testing data, nutritional analyses, ingredient reviews, and consultation with colleagues across multiple disciplines including food microbiology, nutritional epidemiology, and toxicology. I have examined production facility inspection reports, reviewed scientific literature on food additives and their health impacts, analyzed saturated fat and sodium content relative to recommended intake levels, and traced patterns of quality control failures across multiple product lines and manufacturing locations. The brands I will detail in the forthcoming sections of this investigation include both widely recognized national labels and own brand supermarket products, spanning price points from budget offerings to premium positioned items, demonstrating that neither brand recognition nor higher pricing guarantees safety or quality. What unites these 12 brands is not their market positioning or their marketing claims, but rather their documented failures to protect consumer health through adequate safety measures, appropriate ingredient selection, and transparent manufacturing practices. The timing of this information sharing feels particularly urgent given recent shifts in UK food regulation and enforcement that have, in some areas, weakened rather than strengthened consumer protections. Brexit has introduced complexities in food safety oversight, with responsibilities shifting between agencies and some regulatory alignment with European standards becoming less certain. Meanwhile, the Food Standards Agency has acknowledged that despite mounting evidence linking ultra-processed foods and certain additives to adverse health outcomes, they have not yet issued regulations restricting problematic emulsifiers or other additives of concern. This regulatory hesitancy, whilst perhaps understandable given the need for comprehensive evidence and the political pressures from food industry lobbying, leaves consumers without the governmental protections they deserve and necessitates that we take greater personal responsibility for scrutinizing the products we purchase and consume. The FSA has indicated plans for public consultation on these matters, but consultations take time, regulations take longer still, and in the interim, British families continue purchasing and consuming products that available evidence suggests may compromise their health. I want to be absolutely clear about my intentions in bringing this information forward, as transparency and intellectual honesty are paramount in scientific communication, particularly when addressing matters of public health significance. I am not affiliated with any cheese manufacturer, industry, trade group, or competing commercial interest. My funding comes through Imperial College London and research grants that have no connection to commercial cheese production or sales. I receive no financial benefit from consumers choosing one brand over another, and indeed I would much prefer to be conducting basic research rather than serving as a public health advocate. But the evidence I have reviewed compels me to speak because remaining silent when I possess knowledge that could protect families from harm would be an abdication of my responsibility as a scientist and as a fellow member of our community. My goal is not to eliminate cheese from British diets, which would be neither realistic nor desirable, but rather to empower consumers with accurate information that enables informed decision-making about which products genuinely merit a place in a health-promoting diet and which products represent unacceptable compromises of safety and nutritional quality. The broader context for this discussion includes growing awareness across the UK and internationally about the health consequences of ultra-processed food consumption, a category that encompasses many but not all cheese products available in supermarkets today. Large-scale epidemiological studies following hundreds of thousands of participants over many years have documented associations between higher ultra-processed food consumption and increased risks of obesity, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, inflammatory bowel disease, and all-cause mortality. Whilst these associations do not prove that ultra-processed foods directly cause these conditions, the consistency of findings across multiple populations and study designs, combined with plausible biological mechanisms involving inflammation, oxidative stress, gut microbiome disruption, and metabolic dysfunction, provides compelling reason for concern and justifies precautionary recommendations to limit consumption of ultra-processed products whenever practical alternatives exist. In the specific case of cheese, practical alternatives absolutely do exist in the form of traditional cheeses from reputable producers who maintain high safety standards and use minimal processing, making the choice to avoid problematic brands not a sacrifice but rather a straightforward swap that protects health without eliminating the pleasure and nutritional benefits that good cheese provides. The 12 brands that have compelled me to issue this public health warning represent a cross-section of the UK cheese market, ranging from products specifically marketed to children to budget supermarket offerings to ostensibly premium brands that have nonetheless demonstrated serious safety lapses or nutritional inadequacies that render them unsuitable for regular consumption by health-conscious families. My analysis of these brands has considered multiple dimensions of risk, including documented bacterial contamination through official recall notices, excessive levels of sodium and saturated fat relative to recommended intake limits, presence of emulsifiers and additives linked to adverse health outcomes in emerging research, use of artificial colorings and preservatives, reliance on low-quality ingredients and fillers that dilute nutritional value, and patterns of quality control failures that suggest systemic rather than isolated problems within manufacturing facilities and supply chains. Beginning with products specifically marketed towards children, Darylia represents a particularly troubling case because parents naturally assume that products prominently displayed in the children's section of supermarkets and marketed with cheerful packaging and child-friendly messaging have been formulated with young people's health as the paramount concern. Unfortunately, examination of Dairy's ingredient list reveals a heavily processed product that bears little resemblance to traditional cheese, containing not only milk but also whey powder, emulsifying salts including sodium citrate and polyphosphates, citric acid, preservatives, and other additives that serve manufacturing convenience rather than nutritional value. The emulsifying salts used in processed cheese products like Dairy serve to create that characteristic smooth, uniform texture that never separates or becomes grainy, but these phosphate additives have been associated in medical literature with adverse effects on kidney function, disruption of calcium metabolism, and potential cardiovascular implications when consumed regularly over time. For children whose bodies are still developing and whose dietary patterns established in youth often persist into adulthood, regular consumption of heavily processed cheese products sets problematic nutritional precedents and displaces opportunities to consume genuine cheese with superior nutritional profiles. The sodium content in many processed cheese products, including various Dairy formulations, exemplifies another dimension of concern, as research conducted across UK cheese products has documented that salt levels in cheese remain unacceptably high with wide variation even within the same cheese category. A comprehensive cross-sectional survey examining salt content in cheese available in UK supermarkets found that many products contain sodium levels that, when consumed in typical serving sizes and combined with other dietary sources of salt throughout the day, push consumers well beyond the recommended maximum intake of 6 grams of salt daily for adults and even lower limits for children. High sodium intake directly contributes to elevated blood pressure, which represents the single most important modifiable risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And the population-level reductions in salt consumption achieved in the UK between 2001 and present day have been credited with preventing approximately 9,000 deaths annually and generating more than £1.5 billion in economic savings through reduced healthcare costs and lost productivity. When cheese manufacturers continue to produce high-sodium products despite clear evidence of harm and despite the feasibility of salt reduction demonstrated by other producers, they prioritize taste intensity and preservation convenience over the cardiovascular health of their customers. Processed cheese slices represent another category deserving particular scrutiny, as these products typify the transformation of cheese from a relatively simple fermented dairy product into a highly engineered industrial creation containing numerous ingredients never found in traditional cheesemaking. Brands available in UK supermarkets including various own brand processed cheese slices from Tesco, Sainsbury's ASDA, and other major retailers typically contain modified starch, milk proteins that have been isolated and concentrated, vegetable oils, emulsifiers including mono and diglycerides of fatty acids, preservatives, artificial colorings to achieve that uniform orange hue that consumers have been conditioned to expect, and flavor enhancers that mask the inferior taste of low quality. Base ingredients. The heating and emulsifying process used to manufacture these products destroys any beneficial bacteria that might be present in traditionally made cheese, denatures proteins in ways that may reduce their bioavailability, and fundamentally alters the food matrix such that whatever nutritional value remains is substantially diminished compared to authentic cheese produced through time-honored methods. Children and adults alike deserve better than these nutritionally impoverished imitations that occupy valuable space in diets whilst providing minimal benefit and introducing potentially harmful additives. Cathedral City, despite its positioning as a mainstream British brand with widespread availability and substantial marketing presence, has performed disappointingly in independent taste testing and raises concerns about quality relative to price point. Consumer research conducted by Which magazine involving blind taste testing of extra mature cheddar cheeses found that Cathedral City scored below several supermarket-owned brand alternatives and was described as the least enjoyed among the brands tested, with more than a quarter of tasters wanting stronger flavor and concerns raised about salt levels and overall taste profile. Whilst Cathedral City is not among the most heavily processed cheese products and does not contain the extensive additive list seen in cheese slices or spreads, the combination of mediocre sensory qualities, relatively high pricing compared to superior alternatives, and the principle that consumers should demand excellence rather than accepting adequacy in products they purchase regularly justifies recommending that families explore better options. The cheese market in the UK offers numerous superior alternatives at comparable or even lower price points, including Tesco Finest Extra Mature Cheddar and various farmhouse producers whose products demonstrate that quality need not be sacrificed for afford. Pilgrim's Choice similarly underperformed in comparative testing, being rated as joint least liked among branded cheddar products evaluated by Which Magazine's panel of tasters who assess texture, flavor, appearance, and overall satisfaction. When a branded product that commands premium pricing compared to supermarket-owned brands delivers inferior eating quality and sensory experience, consumers are receiving poor value regardless of whatever marketing claims or brand heritage the manufacturer promotes through advertising and packaging. The British cheese tradition encompasses centuries of artisanal production and regional specialities that represent genuine excellence, and settling for mediocre mass-market brands when superior alternatives exist at similar prices represents an unnecessary compromise. I encourage families to approach cheese purchasing with the same discernment they would apply to any significant food category, recognizing that brand recognition and advertising budgets do not correlate with product quality and that independent testing consistently reveals own brand supermarket offerings that match or exceed branded products in blind taste comparisons. The recall history of certain cheese brands provides perhaps the most damning evidence that some manufacturers have failed to maintain adequate safety standards and quality control measures necessary to protect consumers from serious foodborne pathogens. Wicklow farmhouse cheese products have been subject to multiple recalls across 2024 and 2025 due to possible presence of Listeria monocytogenes, with recall notices issued by the Food Standards Agency covering numerous products including Ballakilty Baking Brie, St Killian Cheese, Baking St Killian Cheese, Wicklow Ban, Wicklow Blue Brie, Wicklow Gold Cheddar varieties with nettle and chive or tomato and herb flavorings, and various other products distributed through retailers in Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, and parts of Great Britain. The repetitive nature of these recalls, affecting multiple product lines over an extended time period, suggests not isolated contamination incidents but rather systemic failures in sanitation protocols, environmental monitoring, equipment maintenance, or personnel training that have allowed pathogenic bacteria to persist within manufacturing facilities and contaminate finished products destined for consumer tables. When a producer demonstrates through repeated recalls that they cannot consistently ensure microbiological safety of their products, consumers must conclude that purchasing from such manufacturers represents an unacceptable gamble with family health regardless of whatever positive qualities the cheese might possess when not contaminated. The broader issue of ultra-processed cheese products extends beyond specific brands to encompass entire product categories that have become normalized in British diets despite representing significant departures from traditional cheese and despite accumulating evidence linking ultra-processed food consumption to adverse health outcomes. The British Nutrition Foundation has noted that ultra-processed foods comprise approximately half of average UK dietary intake, a proportion that substantially exceeds recommendations and contributes to the high prevalence of diet-related chronic diseases including obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular conditions. Within the cheese category, ultra-processed variants include cheese spreads like Dairylea and Philadelphia cream cheese products with added flavorings, cheese strings, and other novelty formats marketed to children, heavily flavored cheese products, some PR shredded cheese products that contain anti-caking agents and preservatives, and the aforementioned processed cheese slices. These products typically contain emulsifiers, stabilizers, preservatives, artificial colorings, and other additives that would never appear in home kitchens, and their consumption should be minimized in favor of traditionally made cheeses that provide superior nutrition without the additive burden. Philadelphia cream cheese, particularly the flavored varieties, exemplifies how manufacturers take a relatively simple product and transform it through industrial processing into something far removed from traditional soft cheese. Whilst plain Philadelphia cream cheese made from pasteurized milk and cream with minimal additional ingredients might reasonably fit within a balanced diet when consumed occasionally, the proliferation of flavored versions containing added sugars, artificial flavorings, stabilizers, and other ingredients to create sweet or savory varieties represents unnecessary processing that adds calories and additives whilst providing negligible nutritional benefit. Consumers seeking cream cheese for spreading on bread or incorporating into recipes would be better served by selecting plain, minimally processed options or exploring alternatives from smaller producers who maintain simpler ingredient lists and higher quality standards. The principle that simpler is generally superior applies broadly across cheese selection, with products containing 4 or 5 recognizable ingredients nearly always preferable to those requiring paragraph-length ingredient lists filled with chemical names and e-numbers. The role of emulsifiers in processed cheese products deserves particular emphasis given the emerging scientific evidence suggesting these ubiquitous additives may contribute to gut microbiome disruption, intestinal inflammation, and increased disease susceptibility. Research examining the prevalence of emulsifiers across the UK food supply found that lecithin and mono and diglycerides of fatty acids were present in substantial proportions of ultra-processed foods, with processed cheese products representing significant sources of exposure. Emulsifiers function by allowing fats and water to mix uniformly, creating the smooth, spreadable consistency that processed cheese manufacturers desire, but these same properties that modify food texture may also affect the intestinal mucus layer that protects gut epithelial cells from direct contact with bacteria and dietary components. Animal studies and emerging human research suggest that certain emulsifiers can alter gut bacterial composition, reduce microbial diversity, promote expansion of inflammatory bacterial species, thin the protective mucus layer, and increase intestinal permeability in ways that may contribute to inflammatory bowel disease, metabolic syndrome, and other chronic inflammatory conditions. Whilst definitive proof of harm in humans at typical dietary exposure levels remains an area of active investigation, the precautionary principle suggests limiting consumption of heavily emulsified products when minimally processed alternatives exist. Budget cheese products from various supermarket chains warrant careful evaluation because whilst afford represents a legitimate consumer priority, especially for families facing economic pressures, the lowest priced options sometimes achieve their cost savings through ingredient quality compromises, excessive processing, or production practices that raise safety or nutritional concerns. However, this relationship is not absolute, as independent testing has identified excellent budget options, including Aldi's extra mature cheddar, which received Which Magazine's Great Value Award after scoring well in blind taste testing whilst being the cheapest product evaluated. This finding demonstrates that price and quality need not correlate negatively, and that discerning consumers can identify affordable options that deliver genuine value through combination of reasonable pricing and good eating quality. The key distinguishes between budget products that achieve afford through efficient operations and sensible positioning versus those that cut corners on ingredients, processing standards, or safety measures in ways that compromise consumer welfare. Reading ingredient lists, checking for recall history, comparing nutritional panels, and consulting independent testing results enables identification of budget-friendly cheese products worthy of purchase, whilst avoiding penny-wise but pound-foolish options that save money at the expense of health. Cheese marketed with children specifically in mind through cartoon characters, fun shapes, bright packaging, and placement in the children's section of supermarkets requires especially vigilant scrutiny from parents because manufacturers understand that products appealing to children can generate sustained purchasing patterns and brand loyalty that extends into adulthood, creating strong financial incentives to prioritize marketability over nutritional quality. Beyond derailleur, products like cheese strings, character-branded cheese portions, and novelty cheese snacks typically contain extensive processing, multiple additives, elevated sodium levels, and nutritional profiles inferior to traditional cheese whilst commanding premium prices for the packaging and marketing investments. Parents seeking convenient, portable cheese options for children's lunches and snacks can achieve far better nutritional outcomes by purchasing blocks of good quality cheddar, cutting appropriate portions, and packaging these in reusable containers rather than paying premium prices for heavily processed alternatives wrapped in elaborate packaging destined for landfill. Teaching children to enjoy real cheese rather than engineering them to prefer ultra-processed imitations establishes healthful eating patterns with lifelong benefits whilst demonstrating that convenience need not require compromising on food quality. The intersection of cheese consumption and cardiovascular health represents an area where nuance is essential, as emerging research from large-scale cohort studies, including UK Biobank data, has revealed that cheese consumption, particularly of traditional hard cheeses, shows inverse associations with cardiovascular disease risk contrary to what might be predicted based solely on saturated fat content. Meta-analyses examining dairy consumption and incident cardiovascular disease have found that total dairy intake is associated with modest reductions in cardiovascular disease and stroke risk, with cheese specifically showing protective associations in multiple studies. Potential mechanisms underlying these unexpected findings include the high calcium content of cheese, which may limit absorption of saturated fats and cholesterol, the presence of beneficial fatty acids, including conjugated linoleic acid, in cheese from grass-fed animals, the food matrix effects whereby nutrients in whole cheese are processed differently by the body than isolated nutrients consumed separately, and the probiotic content of traditionally made aged cheeses. These findings do not provide license for unlimited cheese consumption, but they do support the position that traditional cheese in moderate amounts can fit within heart-healthy dietary patterns, whilst the heavily processed cheese alternatives that have been my focus remain problematic due to their additive content, excessive sodium, inferior ingredients, and departure from the traditional cheese forms that have sustained human nutrition for millennia.